It is Wednesday, July 25th, 2018, and this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a Seahawks podcast with myself, Kenneth Arthur of Field Gulls, and Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlog.com. And you know how this works. If you like the show, subscribe on iTunes to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and I'll get that fixed at some point. Today on July 25th, we are one day. July 26th, 2018 is when Seahawks training camp will open. So we are one day away from that. So naturally, here we are on the 25th, previewing, some of the things to look for in Seattle's training camp this year, position battles, who could be stepping up, who could be stepping down, where is Earl Thomas? You know how it goes. I just posted 28 questions leading into training camp over on Field Gulls if you want to check that out. But for now, you're listening to this show, so why not just focus on that? And today we're going to talk about training camp, but we'll open up with maybe the hot topic of the week or the day. For an individual or a team, the LA Rams signed Todd Gurley, a running back, to a 4-year, up to $60 million contract with up to $45 million in guarantees. And it's a record-breaking contract for running backs. It comes out of the blue, given the situation with Le'Veon Bell, who has been the best running back in the NFL and couldn't get a long-term contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Does it quote-unquote reset the market for running backs? Does it change what Le'Veon Bell will get from the Pittsburgh Steelers? Rob, looking at Todd Gurley's contract with the Rams, he had 2 years left on his current deal, given that he was a first-round pick with a fifth-year option. And with all of those 6 years combined, the 4 years added on and the 2 years left on this one, people could say it's roughly $11 to $12 million in average annual salary for the whole piece of it. Over the next 3 years in new money, I was just reading this by Joel Corey of CBS Sports. When you look in that new money range, he's getting slightly more, up to $40 million, I think, in those 3 years than he would have on the fifth-year option and 2 franchise tags. So he gets a good deal on his end, and the Rams, lock up the player at running back who was, Offensive Player of the Year. I think that he had that title, close to getting the MVP last season. What are your thoughts initially on the contract for the Rams? For Todd Gurley, obviously it's a good, but for the Rams, who have been very spendy this offseason, adding players and then extending many of their own except for Aaron Donald, what do you think of this deal for LA?
I think the way that it's structured is a good deal for LA, just because if Todd Gurley continues to produce at a high level and put up big numbers and be the X factor that he is, then he will be worth the cap hit that he's going to cost over the next few years. But as soon as they get out of 2019, which was the original length of his rookie contract, I think, with the fifth-year option attached to it, as soon as they get out of that, there's an out every single year. So, for example, in 2020, if they wish to move on from him, then they were going to $5 million saving. The dead cap hit's quite high, but it's not that high compared to what his cap hit's going to be. And then in 2021, they'd be saving $5 million again. It's $10 million in 2022. So they've kind of structured it in a way that as soon as the rookie deal has concluded, they have an out every single year. And Todd Gurley, it benefits him because he has the opportunity to continue producing and make a lot of money for a running back position, which has seen the value of that position dramatically decrease. So I think it's a win-win for both teams. The Rams have got the control there. If they ever want to move on, they can do. For Gurley, he's got the potential to earn a lot of money if he continues to produce. So there's incentives and positives for both team and player, I would say.
And do you think that, when they talk about the other running backs that have contracts coming up, Le'Veon Bell, Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, another guy in the NFC West, because the Cardinals, David Johnson is reporting to camp. He can't, risk losing his year of service time. But when it comes to those other running backs, do you feel better or worse, for any of those guys to get long-term contracts? Because, Todd Gurley is very young. David Johnson, although they were in the same draft, is 3 years older than Todd Gurley and coming off of, an injury that cost him a season, albeit not a knee injury, not an ankle injury, but a wrist injury. But, there's also the situation where running backs like Todd Gurley 2 years ago can suddenly have very bad seasons. And David Johnson, even though, Todd Gurley's bad season came with Jeff Fisher, well, David Johnson's about to enter a season with a brand new head coach and offensive coordinator. So there are some variables there. But would you, if you were the Cardinals, think about a long-term extension for David Johnson now, or wait it out a year and see what the franchise tag looks like?
Well, I think the Rams have been quite intelligent with this, because I don't think anybody was going to reset the market or anything like that, or give them a gauge for Todd Gurley. And what was going to happen probably is the likes of Bell, whenever he hits free agency, presumably next year, will not get the kind of money that he's looking for. I'm not sure that David Johnson's going to get the kind of money that he would have got before the injury. So there's not going to be a benchmark for the Rams to go, okay, this is our negotiating point. Let's talk to Todd Gurley. What they've done is they've clearly decided Todd Gurley is a very, very, very talented player. He's a unique player. I don't think there's been necessarily anybody like him in the NFL before. He's got the size and the physicality to do sort of the stuff you'd expect a bigger back to do, but he's got that incredible athleticism and mobility that if you needed to split him out wide and use him as a receiver, that you can do. I mean, there just aren't many players with his size and his skill set who can do that. I mean, he's a complete running back. He's the very definition of a modern day running back, and yet he's doing it at about 225, 230, 35 pounds. I mean, it's incredible. It's just a unique player. So acknowledging that and then saying, well, look, we're just going to pay him, but we'll set the deal up to protect ourselves and there's benefits for the player and the team. I think it's a very, very smart move. And now the other teams are going to have to look at this and go, do we want to spend, I think the average for Todd Gurley is something like $14 million a year. Arizona are going to want to commit that to David Johnson. You know, he's a fine player. He's coming off an injury though, and he isn't Todd Gurley. Are they going to want to pay that kind of money for him? I suspect that Arizona Cardinals will not, but Johnson's camp are now going to be saying, look, Todd Gurley set the market for us, and that's what our negotiating point has to be. And I don't think Arizona are going to be interested in paying that. So is there a lesser number that both parties can come to? Possibly. Johnson wasn't a high draft pick like Todd Gurley, so maybe will be willing to take a little bit less just to actually get the big payday, which he hasn't had so far. And then with Le'Veon Bell, I just have no idea how this situation is going to resolve itself, Kenny, because I don't think this is going to set the market for Le'Veon Bell. I don't think Le'Veon Bell, at his point in his career, with the suspensions that he's had, with some of the injury issues that he's had, with his age, with the wear and tear that he's had in Pittsburgh as well, can realistically turn around and sort of expect the kind of money that Todd Gurley's going to get. And he's further down the line in terms of his career. He is somebody who could hit the free agency market, and you could see a team like, for example, the New York Jets with a lot of free cap space just going, look, we'll just pay whatever it takes to get Le'Veon Bell, have a real big name player, a star on the team for a year or two, and maybe we can structure the contract so there's outs for them. But I don't think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be looking at this Todd Gurley contract and saying, right, that's okay. Let's go to Le'Veon Bell now. Let's get a deal done. Let's get this all sorted. I suspect that the Steelers are probably preparing now for one last year with Le'Veon Bell, and then Bell hitting free agency. And it's going to be one of the, if that happens that way, Kenny, it's going to be one of the really interesting storylines in the offseason in 2019 is exactly how much Le'Veon Bell would get on the open market if he reaches that far. You know, is he going to get a high salary like Gurley? And we're going to see maybe some adjustments there, which will lead to other players like Zeke Elliott and Johnson and others getting big money down the line as well. Or is he going to get the treatment that some of the safeties are getting in free agency this year and get lowballed or not be willing to take a lesser number to time with the team? Is he going to be out there for a little longer than maybe he expected? You know, how is this all going to play out? And I don't think anybody can really predict that until we actually see it happen.
Yeah, and you know, not to go off on a tangent with Le'Veon Bell, it's so interesting with. To me, Le'Veon Bell, in a way, I mean, he's blessed to be getting the franchise tag, and he should just, you know, take the $14 million because no running back is going to get that kind of money in a year. Very odd that it happens when it does. And, you know, Todd Gurley could get it, but it just doesn't present itself very often. And Le'Veon Bell getting like $26 or so million over the last 2 years is about as good as any running back can do. And it could be like a Darrelle Revis strategy for running backs to employ in the future, to just be great, go year to year, you know, and know that it's difficult. I mean, obviously Todd Gurley's thing, but what I really want to get at is Le'Veon Bell to me is like the most screwed player in the NFL right now. He basically is coming off of a season with 410-ish touches, plus the playoffs. It's going to put him almost 430 touches last season. And he needs to go out this year and play as well as Le'Veon Bell can play. And for him to do that, you know, obviously the Steelers, if they're like, well, we're giving you all this money, we're going to use you. You know, you're not going to get off the hook and be like in some sort of committee. This is the Le'Veon Bell show. He's looking at another 430 touches. Only 3 players in this century have had back-to-back 400 touch seasons. I think, and this is off the top of my head, it's Edgerrin James, Ricky Williams, and LaDainian Tomlinson. And LaDainian Tomlinson had 3, not back-to-back, in their careers, in that time from 2000 to whatever, LaDainian Tomlinson's retirement, because I think he was the last one to play. In that time, only 2 had 400 touch seasons in their entire careers, and Tomlinson had 3 in his entire career. So now Le'Veon Bell's be asked to do it in back-to-back seasons. You know, for me, when I look at guys, and I've written this article, I think several times at different websites, where when you look at the guys with the most touches in one season, the next season, inevitably they fall apart. Either they get injured, they have 3.2 yards per carry. You know, it happened. That's why nobody should. It was stupid to get near DeMarco Murray after he left the Dallas Cowboys, and the Dallas Cowboys were like, well, we're going to use DeMarco Murray. He's going to be a free agent. We're not going to re-sign him. What do we care how much wear and tear? So Le'Veon Bell can't not play Le'Veon Bell. He has to get out there because he needs to get to next year to get the next contract, and he can't. So he has to be out there for all this amount of usage, which inevitably is going to put him in harm's way over and over again. He is putting wear and tear on his body, he could near 1,000 touches over 2 seasons, and he's going to be 27, and he's going to, and he's had. It's just so much for one running back to do. It's the worst position in the NFL. It's a position that I think players who in high school right now will get further and further away from as they get more and more advisement from coaches. I wrote about very lightly the top high school player in the nation right now down, I think, in Florida. You know, he's choosing his colleges, and he's a running back and he's a linebacker. And, his head coach in his high school is saying, that's cool that, you're the best running back in the nation. You should go be another player. You should rush the passer, because pass rushers get paid. Even linebackers have long careers. It's the worst position to choose in the NFL right now. And Todd Gurley's contract might give people the idea that, hey, no, you can get out there and get money again. Todd Gurley is one player out of, dozens and dozens of NFL professionals, NFL hopefuls, and it's just not going to be, he's going to be the exception to the rule. And for me, looking at Le'Veon Bell, knowing that he has to go out there and play a lot in order to get the contract next. I mean, even then, if you're a team like the New York Jets or Cleveland Browns, and you're looking for a running back next year, and yes, you've got the money, but Le'Veon Bell's coming off of 800 or 900 touches in the last 2 seasons, you're not going to be a little bit more wary. I don't see how Le'Veon Bell is going to get anything near a 4-year, $60 million deal. Maybe, maybe a 2-year 25, maybe a 2-year $24 million deal. I don't know. But since I talked for a while, Rob, I'll give you a chance to rebut if you have anything else to say on that.
Well, I'm not sure it's quite as doom and gloom as that for Le'Veon Bell. What I would say is that there are 1 or 2 running backs, probably more than 1 or 2 actually. I mean, I think it's a good conversation to maybe review in 12 months' time. I mean, if David Johnson gets a huge pay deal, might not be as much as Todd Gurley, but if he gets a very handsome contract, if Le'Veon Bell then hits the free agent market, and there are many teams I was actually just trying to find the numbers. There are many teams with huge swaths of salary cap space in 2019. The Seahawks, funnily enough, being one of them, that could say, look, for the short-term goal, maybe they've got a young quarterback. I mean, the Jets, I use them as an example. Sam Darnold is a rookie this year, and in years 2, 3, and 4, they're going to have him at a very cheap cost. The Jets currently have got more cap space than any team for 2019. They've got $84 million in cap space. Now, they might think, why not put one of the best playmakers in the NFL next to Sam Darnold in the backfield, have those two working together in Darnold's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years, structure the deal so that Le'Veon Bell gets a lot of money in the first couple of years, for example, and then there's outs for the team when it eventually comes to re-signing Sam Darnold to a big contract extension if it gets to that point. That's something that the Jets might consider. The Bills equally, you know, what the heck's going to happen with the Sean McCoy in the next few months? They've also got a young quarterback that they might want to pair with a very talented playmaker in the backfield. The Bills currently have the second most cap space in 2019 with $63 million. The Seahawks, funny enough, a third with about $58 million in cap space at the moment for 2019. So I can see why there are teams that will go out and maybe whether it's as much as Todd Gurley, whether it's more than Todd Gurley, whatever. I think the structure could be set up so that Le'Veon Bell does get this one fairly big contract. At the end of the day, we talk about Todd Gurley being a modern day NFL running back. Le'Veon Bell is as well. You know, he's very good as a receiver. You can have him in on any down. He's the kind of player that I could see a team investing in, but would probably protect themselves with some level of insurance there. And down the line as well, we're going to see, I imagine that Zeke Elliott's going to get paid at some point if he stays healthy. We have to see how Saquon Barkley goes on in the NFL and whether or not he gets a big contract down the line. He was drafted very highly. Rashad Penny's got in the first round as well. So I take your point, Kenny, on how players are viewing their high school careers and recruiting into college and what positions they want to go and play. There's definitely been a turn over the last 10 years, I would say, from players wanting to play defense versus offense. Defense, you've got the stats, you've got the attention, you've got the money. If you can play defensive line instead of offensive line, then definitely that's going to be something that players look at. If it's a choice between running back and linebacker, though, it might not quite be the same because linebackers aren't getting paid at the same level as running backs, not as running backs, as defensive linemen. There might still be the opportunity there. There is a stat value of being running back, and the young players will like, that being able to tally stats. That tackles aren't quite as sexy as touchdowns and yardage and stuff like that will appeal to young men. And if they are seeing players like Zeke and Todd Gurley and Johnson and Le'Veon Bell getting paid, then I do think there will be players still willing to play running back. But I think the big concern for the NFL and for players in high school to college more than anything is that willingness to play defensive line and get the sacks versus playing defensive line where you get zero stats, you get zero glory, you up until recently weren't getting as much money. That is obviously been the big issue, and it's something we've talked about a lot in terms of the draft.
Well, speaking of running backs and salary, Christopher Carson is one guy who's making just $600,000 a year. One of the great bargains for the Seahawks if he's able to come back from his injury. And even Rashad Penny, just $2.6 million. And those two guys could combine to be perhaps, a really good running back duo for Seattle, one of the top running back duos in the NFL if it works out for the Seahawks in the way they want it to work out. Of course, Rob, we've talked a lot about how they've focused and refocused on improving that running game over the 2018 offseason. And Rashad Penny, Chris Carson, we'll get into this. We're going to get into this training camp situation and camp battles right now. So starting at running back, Rob, when you look at Rashad Penny, the rookie, when you look at Chris Carson, what we saw from him last year and coming back, healthy this year, we hope. Do you see that as a competition? Do you see that as the coaches just trying to figure out how were we going to fit these two guys together on the field at the same time? And then, what's going on with CJ Prosise and JD McKissick in your mind in terms of the usage of the running backs, both at the front of the game and the back?
That's a really interesting camp, isn't it, for the running back position, Kenny? I think that at the moment, Chris Carson, the noise that has come from everybody during OTAs and stuff like that is that every time he takes the field, he looks like the best guy on the field. So you'd have to imagine that right now, he's the guy who's going to be the running back one, that he's going to be the one who's sort of leading the thing at the moment, and it's up to Rashad Penny to try and get ahead of him or just compete and get an equal share of the spoils when the season begins. That's going to be the big key thing here. I don't think it's a bad thing at all that the Seahawks have got two of these guys. And the other thing is that Chris Carson's also got to prove that he can stay healthy. I mean, he didn't do that at Oklahoma State, always seemed to have some kind of an injury issue there, has not had a lot of carries in college. He had a very good start to his Seahawks career, but then obviously got injured again. So he's got to prove that he can take on a 16-game season. And if he and Penny are there sharing carries, it might help them both. The Seahawks was going to find a way to get two running backs working together. I think at least that's one good thing that Brian Schottenheimer showed in New York when he was there and the offensive coordinator, that he can get two, I think it was Thomas Davis, was it? And LaDainian Tomlinson, who were working together in New York. may be wrong on that, but that's sort of my memory trying to tell me there, that he's worked well with two running backs, that he can work with a double-headed monster, and that's obviously something that could be a real positive for the Seahawks. They've got to get this running game going. They've got to connect the run to Russell Wilson's ability. They've got to get the offense and the defense connected again. They've got to win time of possession. They've got to win field position, and this is all based around getting that running game improved this year. They've spent a lot of time this offseason getting that right. So that's a big thing. In terms of the other guys that you mentioned there, I mean, this is the good thing. I mean, I watched the Eagles game again yesterday, or some highlights of the Eagles game, and seeing Mike Davis play as well as he did. And you wonder, what role has he got into this? And is he going to factor into the competition? Is he a good number 3 to have on there? Can CJ Prosise stay healthy or show any signs that he can finally have that kind of an impact? Or is he just sort of in last chance saloon and getting one more training camp and preseason to show that he's worth keeping around? What's J.D. McKissic's role, given that Seattle has got a number of running backs who can play on third downs now? Not just Chris Carson, but Penny. They've got CJ Prosise. Davis also showed that he's got some ability in the passing game. They've got a number of options there. So is having more of a receiver slasher type running back something that they still want to have on this roster? They clearly like his personality and his grit and his character, McKissic. So how does he figure into this little competition here? So I think it's possibly the second most interesting situation to play out during training camp. I think it's something that fans are going to be watching the preseason games to keep an eye out for. Don't think we'll see too much of Carson and Penny in terms of going deep into the second half, for example, but those secondary backs who are going to get a lot of carries, it's always an interesting position to look at during preseason, I think, because it is a position where you can actually get some production, you can actually get some excitement. It always seems like every year we're talking about a young running back on the roster of some description, you know, with Spencer Ware in the past and Pope and others that have really sort of come to the full. Carson as well last year. So it's always an interesting position to watch, and it's going to be intriguing again this year.
Yeah, and if running back, it feels with Seahawks, it feels more like, you know, we like these guys, and we know that I think everybody has a high level of confidence despite last season's disaster with, you know, Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls and all of that. Despite all of that, and how the Seahawks perhaps are the worst running back corps in the NFL in quite some time. Despite all that, I think everyone feels pretty confident that they're going to wind up with 3 or 4 pretty good guys based on, you know, what we know about Penny, Carson, Prosise, McKissic, Davis. They'll wind up probably with 3 good guys. At the wide receiver position, it doesn't feel quite as sure. And that may be just me, but it feels to me like once you get past Doug Baldwin, there's a huge drop-off to Tyler Lockett. And then once you get to Tyler Lockett, there's another huge drop-off. And that could be that we'll find out that there actually isn't that big of a drop-off, whether it's Jerron Brown or Amara Darboh or David Moore or Brandon Marshall, followed by Marcus Johnson, Tanner McAvoy, and Cyril Grayson. But more than likely than not, you know, it doesn't feel as positive now that Paul Richardson's gone. You know, they've been sort of wide receiver is a position that Pete Carroll and John Schneider seem to favor when it comes to the draft, free agency, and trades, that they'll go and spend more on that position. But then they also let those guys go, whether it's Golden Tate or Jermaine Kearse or whatever. They'll move on and they'll find something else. Paul Richardson now the latest guy to be on the way out. Doug Baldwin being the one guy that they really retained and have built around, which is understandable because I think he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. But after Baldwin, it becomes a bit of a mixed bag and unsure of what to expect, and nobody really knows who's going to be on the roster outside of Baldwin, Lockett. And then I really think Jerron Brown is pretty close to a lock. But after that, it's pretty much unsure. And I think Amara Darboh also pretty close to a lock, but a lot of people want to debate that. For you, Rob, after we get to Doug Baldwin, are you assuming Tyler Lockett to be a pretty steady number 2 option? And then who would you expect to be in competition, the serious contenders for, you know, the number 3 and number 4 wide receiver positions?
Yeah, I think this is the most interesting position going into training camp to keep an eye on. And Doug Baldwin, yeah, is obviously a lock. I think Tyler Lockett is as well. Those 2 guys are going to be sort of written up. You can put their names in pen, and then it's probably like an open competition for everybody else, because Brandon Marshall's certainly not a lock. You know, he's going to have to show that he's still got some juice left in preseason. We've seen them take on veteran receivers like this in the past, and they haven't made it through camp, or they've gone with the younger guys. So Marshall's got a lot to prove there. So he's one option. Amara Darboh has to show a lot more. He has to take a step forward here. I think last year, perhaps they were unwilling to just write him off immediately. There's a lot of contention about whether he should have been cut, whether they should have kept other receivers. They kept him for a year. So it's a big training camp for now. He has to take steps forward. He's the sheer numbers that they've got going into training camp at receiver. He can't rest on his laurels anymore as a former 3rd-round pick. He's got to deliver now. He's got to show something. Jerome Brown has had surprisingly, his numbers, I don't think many people realize this, we're not a million miles away from Paul Richardson's a year ago. And Arizona lost Carson Palmer very early in the year. Their offense was a bit of a mess. So the fact that he put up the numbers that he did, I think you're probably right, Kenny, that he's probably more of a lock than maybe people realize to actually get an opportunity. He's got a somewhat of a proven commodity, can maybe take on that Paul Richardson role, a like-for-like swap there in terms of the roster. So I think that there's a pretty decent chance that he's going to be earmarked for that. But they brought in Marcus Johnson as well, who could also be used in that type of a role in the trade that led to Michael Bennett going out. So he's another name to keep an eye on. They seem to like Moore, who they drafted a year ago, and they've talked him up an awful lot. So has he got a chance to take a big step forward here and make his place onto the team at the expense of whether it's a Darbo, whether it's a McAvoy or somebody like that? You know, Tanner McAvoy is another one. He's been with the team for 2 years now and has never really been anything more than a great athlete who figures every now and again. You know, he needs to be able to show that he can be a consistent force at receiver now. Unless they really, really just value his special teams value, he has to show a bit more. So he's somebody who has to really deliver now. And you know, Stringfellow is a player that they brought in. They seem to like him. He might be, if they're looking for a bigger receiver, which you have to presume that they are, he might be directly battling with someone like Brandon Marshall, for example, almost like a cheaper alternative to Brandon Marshall. So he's somebody to watch too. So there are so many options here. It could go in so many different ways. I think it's very hard to say with any confidence, aside from Baldwin and Lockett, who is actually going to make this roster at receiver. And I think that's a great thing because the Seahawks in the past, you know, they didn't have any big names. When you're looking at when Russell Wilson came forward, you know, he obviously had Sidney Rice, but apart from that, it was a bunch of guys that they brought together with grit, you know, free agents like Kearse and Baldwin. Golden Tate, yes, had emerged, but he'd had to really struggle through a couple of difficult years before coming to prominence. And there was other guys who came. You look at the players who had an impact for the Seahawks at receiver over the years, and it wasn't sort of the big, high drafted, big name receivers. It was these guys who came in and did a job for them. And it looks to me like a group again who are more in that kind of, if this is the Seahawks going back to what they used to be and what their identity is and what they wanted to do, and, you know, running the ball and blocking for the run particularly well and having that toughness up front, taking it to the opponent, blocking at receiver, big play receivers who can get the chunk yardage, but also can help in the running game. I think this is a group that looks like it's capable of doing that now. So it's going to be fascinating to see which receivers actually develop and come through and win a job. And hopefully it is players winning a job, Kenny. It's not players losing a job and other players getting in by default.
And Rob, if I placed a scenario in front of you, a little difficult, pick one, but I would just, and it's kind of, they're not even the same position, but who do you think may have a bigger impact, Amara Darboh or Nick Vannett, another guy who is sort of in that turning point area?
That's a difficult one to answer because the thing with Vannett is that I think that and I know I'm not basing this on anything, I've not heard anything, but I suspect that he's kind of underwhelmed them a little bit because his role never truly developed. And I think a year ago, as a second-year tight end, knowing that there was a chance that Jimmy Graham was going to leave, knowing that there was a chance that Luke Wilson was going to leave, his role was still pretty tepid, pretty small. And I think if he was going to take that sort of big step, we would have seen more of a focal point for Nick Vannett last year. He would have been getting some of maybe the opportunities that Wilson was getting, and they would have really pushed him forward, thinking that year 3 could be a big year for him. And not only that, the fact that they've gone out and drafted Will Disley, the fact they've gone out and got Ade Dixon. I suppose if you were putting a depth chart together, how many people would actually put Vannett at number 2? I mean, they've talked so much about how much they like Will Disley. You'd almost be tempted to put Disley at number 2 behind Dixon and keep Vannett at number 3, which kind of speaks volumes to maybe how he's disappointed a little bit here. You want to see him focus. You want to see him take this opportunity now. You want to see him coming into training camp and saying, I'm going to make a career of this and I'm going to make this my year. You know, there's a huge opportunity for Vannett there. I mean, Ed Dixon's a short-term measure. Will Disley's not, but Dixon is. Vannett could be the future of this team at tight end if he wants to be. but he's got to sort of really knuckle down now and deliver on that. So for that reason, and because they brought Disley in and they seem to really like him, and Dixon's going to be the presumed number one and the main target and receiving tight end, I think I'll probably go with Darboh in this instance, just because, as I mentioned, Baldwin and Lockett are locks. Then it's wide open for everybody else, and there's an opportunity there for Darboh, and it's his second year. Let's see if he can take that opportunity and really run with it in a way that Vanette didn't a year ago. So if you're giving me those two players, which is more likely to have a bigger impact, I'd probably put money on Darboh, but it's hard to tell with either of them at the moment.
Yeah, and you know, when it comes to third round picks, the Seahawks have had a number of them over the last few years. And I think I think it's too soon to really judge the 2017 class, though a lot of people are. So I'm just going to pose to you also, when it comes to guys like Amara Darboh, Delano Hill, going back a year, you know, with Nick Vanette, Reese Adiambo, and CJ Prosise, you know, do you think that the Seahawks are quote unquote bad at those third round picks? Do they have their positives as well with, you know, Shaquille Griffin, and Nazaire Jones? But when it comes to that range, and, you know, Tedrick Thompson was just outside of it, would you be concerned with Seattle's decisions at the end of day two, or do you think it's about the normal hit rate for that range?
I've never been a big fan of quantity, Kenny. I'm not just saying this because the Seahawks seem to have missed, or, you know, not smashed it out the park with a number of third round picks over the years. Had an awful lot of third round picks in 2016 and 2017. So I'm not just saying it off the back of that, but I've never been one that felt like, hey, look, if you get 5 picks in this particular round, that gives you a chance to draft 5 guys and it gives you a better chance to find. I've never liked that kind of approach to it. I've never seen real evidence that works for teams. You know, you spread yourself quite thin, and you end up drafting guys that maybe fit profiles rather than sort of, when you've got one pick in a round, you can go, this is the guy we want. This is the guy we're targeting. This is our guy in that round. And you see how that's worked for them in the past, whether it was Russell Wilson in round 3, for example. That's obviously an extreme example there. But sometimes when you've got so many picks and you've got so many guys to choose from, and it looks bad as well, because it just by nature, when you get to the third round, you're talking about guys who might be the 95th best player in the draft or the 105th best player in the draft or something like that. You know, they're not sure things in that range. You know, the guy who's taken 95th might have as good a chance of making the NFL or a career out the NFL as the guy drafted at 180. I mean, you're right into the middle of the draft at that point. And if you take 3-4 guys in the third round, everybody kind of banks on those picks working out. And then when they don't, it's open season on criticism for the team. But really, 3rd, 4th round picks, you know, you're never really sort of banking on those guys making it in the NFL. It's great when they do, but I don't think you can criticize a team too much when they don't. You are you're taking chances on physical profiles or preferences or scheme fits in that range. You always are. So my take on it is, I'm not sure it's always the best policy to just acquire picks in that range and thinking that giving yourself the most chances to hit is the best way to do it. I kind of prefer a focus on, this is the guy that I want, and, you know, that's my personal preference. Having done a lot of work on the draft, that seems to work out better more when you're targeting specific players, as opposed to just saying we've got a load of picks in this range and we'll take guys that fit our profile. And when I'm judging the Seahawks on what they've done in the third round, I will never criticize the Seahawks for their work in the third round, because they found a franchise quarterback in the third round of the NFL draft. And when that never happens, you know, Dak Prescott, is he a franchise quarterback? We'll find out in the next few years. You know, he's had one great year and one year where he was kind of so-so. Let's see in the next 2 or 3 years where the Cowboys found their guy in the 4th round. But when you actually look through the drafts certainly since I've been following the NFL, there haven't been too many of these guys that you found outside of the first round are going to be great quarterbacks. So the fact that the Seahawks found a franchise quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in this generation, in the third round, for me is enough to say that, you know, fair play to them in that regard. And if people like Shaquille Griffin work out as well, and one or two of these others that have been in that draft, you know, there's still a chance that some of these players are actually going to end up being good picks for them, then I think you could end up saying that, yeah, you know, fair enough. They've got what they could out of the third round over the years.
Well, how's this for rounds? First, second. That would be Jermaine Ifedi, first round pick. DJ Fluker, first round pick. Dwayne Brown, first round pick. Justin Britt, second round pick. Ethan Posick, second round pick. Obviously, Fluker and Brown were not drafted by the Seahawks, but the Seahawks traded a high price to acquire Dwayne Brown. They have signed DJ Fluker to play right guard. And for, the first time in what feels like a long time, the Seahawks have spent, basically a whole year, after Fluker's signing, knowing who their starting five would be when they opened camp, feeling that these are going to be the five guys who will start week one. Having Mike Solari as the offensive line coach, there's another change there from Tom Cable. So they've got 3 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. Their bench has 2 third-round picks in Reese Adiyambo and Isaiah Battle, and 5th-round rookie Jamarco Jones, Jordan Ruse, George Fant, Joey Hunt, Willie Beavers. I mean, these guys make up the depth for the Seattle Seahawks. Avery Young, Marcus Henry, Skylar Phillips make up the depth as well for the Seahawks on the offensive line. But Rob, when looking at the starting 5 offensive line, Brown, Posick, Britt, Fluker, Ifedi, I mentioned their draft pedigree. Obviously, for some, it doesn't really matter anymore. We know where they stand in terms of guys like Fluker. What are the odds, do you think, that these aren't the 5 guys that start week one? How much competition will there be for Fluker and Ifedi's positions? And is Posick even really, locked in at this point? Thoughts on the offensive line now as we enter camp?
I think the 2 positions that are locked in are Dwayne Brown and Justin Britt, and I think everything else is open. And I think the one thing that suggested that is the case, Kenny, is the fact that they brought J.R. Sweezy in for a meeting recently, and obviously he remains unsigned. There's a chance that he could come back as well, and it at least indicates that the Seahawks are keeping their options open. So when they start training camp, they'll have a look at the likes of Fluker. They couldn't have a look much at during OTAs because of his injury situation. Is Posick developing the way that they want? They're covering their bases there. And I think that you could see a legit competition at right tackle between George Fant and Jermaine Ifedi. I think you could see Fluker pushed by one of the guards on the roster, whether that is, that they essentially redshirted Jordan Ruse last year and kept him around, so they clearly like him. Is it possible that J.R. Sweezy comes back? There's another. Could George Fant play guard? Yes, he could. I think that there is going to be legit competition there. I think it's quite a... I'm feeling more positive about the offensive line than maybe I think other people are at the moment. And I get it that after so many years of disappointment, Kenny, that people just assume that the Seahawks have got a bad situation. They don't know how to assess talent on the offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, I think you look at the offensive lines around the league, and it's, apart from Dallas and maybe something like Oakland, for example, you're not going to know many of the names on offensive lines around the NFL. And most of them are just, the key to me to have a good, successful offensive line is communication, turning 5 guys into essentially one complete unit, everybody doing their jobs properly. And if that happens, you can have some success. Now, you're not going to shut down pass rushers every week. You're going to play the best athletes in the NFL every single week, because that's the way that the game's gone. The best athletes play defensive end, they play defensive tackle. The Seahawks aren't going to be able to stop Aaron Donald because nobody can. They might be able to limit him, but they're not going to stop him. He's going to make some plays. If they come up against guys like Calais Campbell, like they have for years in Arizona, they did against Jacksonville last year, he's going to cause them some problems. That's not going to change. But if they can get these players organized, working together as one, doing their jobs, executing better, then they can have some success there. And that's been the issue, I think, over the last couple of years. I never quite jumped on the hammer Tom Cable bandwagon like a lot of other people, but it was hard to see, Jermaine Ifedi sort of not doing the right thing on a certain play, or seeing 2 players seemingly working towards 2 different play calls. And just you could see Jermaine Ifedi processing things in his brain as the play is developing. Am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? And I think a new coaching voice now, and a very experienced coaching voice in Mike Solari, might just iron out some of those issues, because there's no doubting that the likes of Ifedi and Posick and Britt have got physical talent. It's just about getting them to operate as one great, sustainable unit now. They're always going to come up against the challenge that Russell Wilson's a scrambling quarterback, and it's going to be hard to block for him as a consequence of that. But if it can just get a level of consistency and execution from this team, then they can have some success. And that'll mean that they can run the ball better. And it means that Russell Wilson might just get a little bit more time to make a throw. And if those things happen, and they can run the ball, and Russell can have a bit more time, the sky's the limit for the Seahawks offense. They've got talent on offense. We talked about Carson, a very, very fine player. Penny's going to come in. They've got some talent at receiver. Doug's still there. Wilson's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. There's a real potential for this offense to take a giant step forward. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this offensive line looks in preseason. And I sincerely hope, Kenny, that they can avoid any kind of horrible injuries. Just look how badly the George Fant injury impacted the Seahawks a year ago in preseason. And the fact that they then had to go out and trade for Dwayne Brown, and how that's going to impact them not just in the draft this year, but next year as well. Hopefully they can avoid any of those injuries, not just on the offensive line, but across the roster, but especially on the offensive line. They can find 5 guys that they like, they can get them working as one, and they can finally move this thing in the right direction.
Looking at the defense, it's interesting to really step back. And even though we know there's been a lot of changes and departures, it's really interesting to step back and see that once you get past Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, pretty much this entire defense, the most veteran next player after Wagner and Wright, assuming Earl Thomas isn't going to be there, is going to be Frank Clark. I mean, really, in terms of players that are starting, and maybe I'm looking around, but maybe even the whole defense, Frank Clark is going to be basically a veteran now on the defense. There's no Cliff Averill, there's no Michael Bennett. It's him, and he's got to be the guy if the Seahawks are going to take that next step on defense, continue, a lineage of quality play under Pete Carroll. And Frank Clark is going to have to be, pretty much outside of Bobby Wagner, maybe the most important person on this defense, assuming Earl Thomas, we don't know when he'll come back. But Frank Clark's responsibilities are magnitude to a great degree bigger than they were a year ago. So, Rob, when you're looking at the defensive line, for Frank Clark, how big is it to watch him develop into being the voice and the leader, and being a guy who now everything will be handed to him and say, you got to not just be a really good rotational player, you got to step out there on first downs every single week. You got to produce, 13, 14 sacks. You got to rush the passer. You got to be our Chandler Jones. You got to be our Calais Campbell. What are your expectations for Frank Clark?
Yeah, I think you're right. He has to find that level now, because he's no longer number 3 behind Bennett and Averill. It's quite I imagine that was quite a comfortable role for him there. The expectation pressure wasn't on him to go out and deliver every single week. He probably wasn't getting as much focus as someone like Michael Bennett was getting. And being third in line and the younger guy on the roster is quite a comfortable position to be in. Hey, now you've got to be number 1. Now you've got to get out there. You're going to face the best pass rusher, best pass blocker they've got in the league pretty much most weeks. You can still move him around and find roles for him and angles for him to attack the quarterback, but he's got to deliver now. And the thing about Frank is that he showed in certain games, I think at the Rams on the road last year, and maybe in the Eagles game at CenturyLink, where he looked genuinely like he had the capability to be one of the genuinely best 4-3 edge rushers in the NFL. He's got everything that you look for: physically, size, speed, explosive physical traits. He is the complete package, Kenny. Without the issues off the field that he had going into his draft, he would have been a top 10 lock, guaranteed. Okay, so he has absolutely everything. He needs to be a star NFL player. Go out and deliver. This is your big opportunity. You're absolutely right. He has to be the Chandler Jones now. He has to be the guy. If he goes out there and plays consistently well for 16 games this year, he is going to get paid, either by the Seahawks or by somebody else. He is going to get huge money. This is an opportunity for him to set himself up for the rest of his life. It's also an opportunity for him on a professional level to be finally established as one of the best players in the league at his position, at one of the most important positions in the league as well. That should motivate him. So let's see how he does, because too often during Frank's career, he's shown these flashes of brilliance. You want to believe that he's going to be the real deal. And then he'll disappear for 2 or 3 weeks and you won't see much from him. And then he emerges again. You think, wow, look at Frank Clark. What an amazing game he's had. And then he disappears for a couple of weeks. He needs to put it together week after week after week, because he is the Bennett now. He is the Averill now. He has to go and deliver. The other guys, the Dion Jordans, are the ones who are going to be backing him up. You're looking for Green to come in and try and carve out a role while Frank Clark's delivering on the field. That's the big thing. So he has to find that level of consistency now. He's capable of it. He's capable of being brilliant, but he's got to do it. This is his opportunity. In 12 months' time, Frank, don't wish that you'd really taken this opportunity. Don't throw this away. Go out and deliver now. Get into training camp, have a great season, get yourself a huge contract.
And how hopeful are you now? Because after we've talked about, we can talk about Frank Clark and stepping into one of the roles. He can only be one guy, so he can maybe be better than Bennett and Averill, but he can't be two players. You mentioned Deion Jordan, you mentioned Rasheem Green. Rounding out the depth at defensive end could be Marcus Smith, Quentin Jefferson, Brandon Jackson. How concerned are you for that defensive end position? Knowing that the Seahawks are not they're gonna have two guys out there. Are they gonna go into more sets with Barkevious Mingo perhaps playing that role? Is this the position that maybe concerns you the most?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it will concern if anybody thinks the offensive line is the biggest issue in Seattle. It's not anymore. It's definitely going to be that pass rush, because if let's say Frank doesn't get that level of consistency we've talked about, if he's just what he has been for the previous seasons, that'll be fine in some games, but in others, you'll be relying on people like Deion Jordan to stay healthy and a rookie like Rasheem Green to come in and have an impact there. They don't have that great interior pass rusher either, who can make up for it a little bit. So where's the pass rush going to come from? And if you're not rushing the passer, and if the quarterback's getting a lot of time in the pocket with a different secondary that may or may not include Earl Thomas, which is going to have some changes at quarterback, that hasn't got Richard Sherman anymore. Are the Seahawks going to be a team that struggles to get off the field? Are they going to be a team that is going to struggle to convert those third downs and get off the field, that we've seen so many times when they had Bennett and Averill, and when they had Earl and Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor? These are issues that could become punctuated into even more of a problem, and you've got to be able to rush the passer now. The counter to that, I suppose, is that the Seahawks weren't a bad team at all in 2011, 2012, when they were relying on Chris Clemens. And Chris was the only pass rush threat really at all. He was the one who was getting sort of 12.5 sacks, and nobody else was really doing anything. They brought Bruce Irvin in 2012, but his role was still quite niche, quite limited in that regard. And it wasn't until they brought in Bennett and Averill in 2013 that this thing really took off and the Seahawks became the kind of team that they would eventually become. But my concern now is that, even in 2011, 2012, they still had the Shermans, the Thomases, the Chancellors, great depth at the secondary. And if the secondary talent is going to take a step back, and even the most optimistic Seahawks fan is going to say that it is, especially if Earl Thomas isn't there anymore, they're probably going to need a bit more from that pass rush. And the pass rush has got weaker. As I'm going into the college season, Kenny, I'm going to be spending most of my time, I know now, watching the pass rushes. Last year it was running backs. This year it's going to be pass rushers. I'm going to be watching it's a good draft, set to be a good draft for pass rushers. Nearly every week I'm going to be watching the college football on my TV, and I'll be watching out for those big pass rushers, because that is what Seattle is undoubtedly, in my opinion, going to be targeting next year. Unless they're going to go out and spend a wild contract on someone like Ziggy Ansah, which I just don't see happening, because he's going to be getting a ridiculous amount of money. I just don't see that as a situation. I think the draft is going to be a solution there, and they are going to go and look for a pass rusher next year, because that's their biggest need, and it is the biggest concern. And while we can be optimistic that the offense improves and they run the ball better and they protect Russell Wilson a bit better, my concern is, are they going to struggle to get off the field against the really good passing teams that are just going to get these long, sustained drives, and they're not going to force the turnovers, and they're not going to have the dynamic secondary, and they're just simply not going to have that rotation at pass rusher up front. That is a big question mark, the biggest question mark, and it could be an issue for the team this year.
Rob, I think maybe my next question after this one will involve some undrafted free agents, or for the Seahawks that maybe to look out for. And I'm just letting you know that now, in case you need to pull up a list or anything like that, or if you have them already on the top of your head, then that's keep that in mind. But the reason that I'm saying that, the end to that is looking at the Seahawks defensive tackle position. Jaron Reed obviously is one of the guys that we can pen in there for starting defensive tackle. I think he's been an elite run stopper. People want to see him maybe be more of a pass rusher, or, can he be more disruptive inside on passing downs and become a complete defensive tackle? I think he still has the potential to do that. But Jaron Reed and Nazir Jones is a guy that a lot of people are very much looking forward to his return. Tom Johnson, perhaps, the free agent signing from the Minnesota Vikings, expected to be a part of that rotation. No expectations that he wouldn't make the team, though. Who knows? They also signed Shamar Stephen, who was Tom Johnson's teammate over in Minnesota. We don't know everything yet on Malik McDowell. We'll probably never know everything on Malik McDowell. There was the story that he was, very close to being released. Not in the, he may still just be released. And maybe when that story came out, the Seahawks said, whoa, okay, well, there's no reason for us to do this now. Since the story is out, let's just hold on to Malik McDowell. Who knows if he has any sort of future. But one guy that fan after fan after fan wants to put on this roster is Poona Ford, undrafted free agent out of Texas, a defensive tackle. If he made the team, he'd be one of the shortest defensive tackles in NFL history, coming in at 5'10", 5'11". But, a guy that a lot of people like and thought that she should have been drafted and was the best player on Texas's defense. So looking at the defensive tackle position with Reed, Jones, Johnson, Stephen, Eddie Wilson is really the deep depth. What are the hopes and dreams for those fans that want to see Poona Ford on the roster?
Well, yeah, I think there's a decent chance that Poona will make it, and they've kind of recycled some of the undrafted free agents that they brought in, and we've seen one or two already leave the team that people were quite excited that they got in the first wave of undrafted free agency, but then they got into the workouts and they got moved on pretty quickly, and they brought a new batch in. So Poona's the one who has kind of stuck around. You hear so many positive things about him from the Texas coach. I've written pieces about him, and we've done podcasts about him in the past, Kenny, and I just think that he's an exceptional prospect in a unique ability, which is he's got the stoutness and the short height, which means that he wins a lot of leverage battles, but these long arms which help him keep people off his frame. So there isn't really anybody you can compare him to in that regard. I've not seen anybody like that, and I'm really excited to see Poona Ford. And yeah, there's definitely an opportunity that he's going to make it onto this roster. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the expense of anybody either. They might just be able to find, they usually redshirt a guy on the roster. So if they redshirt Poona, or if they just have him as an extra defensive lineman on there rather than redshirting somebody else, then I could definitely see him sticking around. He's going to come into the preseason and have an impact. I mean, if he just struggles or he doesn't look the part or it's just a bit too much for him, then he's not going to stick around. But as long as he shows some potential there, then I think there's a decent chance that one way or another, he's going to make the roster. And let's then see if he can have an impact as an undrafted free agent. But he is a guy who, for me, he's that type of undrafted free agent that you see make it, that you see stick around. And I'll be definitely keeping an eye out for number 97 during the preseason games. Hopefully he's going to get a lot of playing time there. It will be interesting to see the likes of Jacob Martin can also have an impact there. Rasheem Green as well, if he comes in, Eddie Wilson. So, listen, I talked there about concerns about the defensive line in terms of the pass rush. I do think the Seahawks have some talent on the defensive line. And the stoutness in the middle is always something that's been a feature for this team. They've always been good at stopping the running game. I think that will continue this year. That'll be a big plus for them. My only concern is it's 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12. Are they going to be able to get off the field? Because that's been an issue seemingly for the whole time that Pete Carroll has been with the Seahawks. It's an issue that other teams seem to do a good job getting the Seahawks off the field in that situation. It'd be nice if they just, listen, no one's going to complain if a team converts a 3rd and 4, especially if they've got like Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. But if a team's converting 3rd and 12, 3rd and 15 with regularity, then it becomes an issue. And that's something where the Seahawks have to improve. Have they got the pass rushers to combat that situation? It's going to be something that we find out. I suppose the one thing I have to say, Kenny, because I talked a lot about the pass rushers there, and the two players I haven't mentioned in that regard that could still really help the Seahawks in terms of their pass rush are Bukavius Mingo, who's going to be sort of that Sam Leo type, who is got probably his last chance to really make a career of this in the NFL. And the other one's Shaquem Griffin, who could come in, and if he can come in and have any kind of an impact the way that he did at UCF as a nickel pass rusher, nickel linebacker type, then he could provide some impact there as well. So they're two important players to remember as we're talking about pass rush options.
If Earl Thomas was not on the Seahawks this year, or if they go into week 1 without Earl Thomas, or even how they're going to open up training camp right now, and you look into the secondary for Seattle, You see Bradley McDougald at one of the safety positions, added in 2017. You might see Delano Hill at one of the safety positions, added in 2017. You might have seen Tedrick Thompson at one of the safety positions, added in 2017. At cornerback, you'd see Shaquille Griffin, added in 2017. At cornerback, you'd see Justin Coleman, added in 2017. At cornerback, you'd see Byron Maxwell, added in 2017. And I'm aware that he was a Seahawk ahead of time. Added prior to that, you might find DeAndre Elliott, who missed 2017. You might find Nico Thorpe, you might find Mike Tyson added in 2017. You might find Trey Flowers added in 2018. You might find Alex Carter added in 2017, signed to a futures contract in 2018. You might find safety Mo Alexander added in 2018. You see what I'm getting at here, whether it's TJ Mutcherson or Dante Johnson. Earl Thomas is basically the only guy worth noting that was on this roster prior to last year. They have completely churned the secondary. It is all new guys. And if Earl Thomas doesn't report, and maybe he's sitting there saying, see what you got without me. You've got no veteran presence in that secondary other than Byron Maxwell, who was cut by his team last year in the middle of the year. This is a brand new secondary, Rob. And a lot of people can feel excited about that and know that Pete Carroll is a great coach for defensive backs. And Shaquille Griffin played very well for rookies. Justin Coleman played extremely well for the trade that he was acquired for, giving up basically very little to nothing to acquire Justin Coleman. And now he seems one of the most important players in that secondary. Bradley McDougald, a very good one-year signing that turned into a 3-year deal this year. They've managed to turn most players in the last 8 years from underrated, underwhelmed, overlooked cornerbacks in the draft, safeties in the draft, to Pro Bowlers, All Pros, Hall of Famers, good players, role players, guys that have gone on to jobs at other teams, whether it was Walter Thurmond or Ron Parker or Byron Maxwell himself getting a huge contract from the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a good secondary coach team. So for the Seattle Seahawks, all these new faces, all these new names, do you think that the Seahawks secondary without Earl Thomas and with Earl Thomas can still be one of the better units in the NFL, or is this going to be a difficult year of transition? Any surprises that you see in there?
Listen, I think it can be a good defense. There's no reason why it can't be. You've mentioned it there, Kenny. If there's one position that the Seahawks under Carroll and Schneider have been able to consistently draft and develop, its secondary talent. And I think that maybe some of these guys are going to benefit from Earl Thomas not being there, and some of these other bigger names not being there in the past. They're not going to look up and see their route to starting shut down by Cam, Earl, and Richard Sherman. They're not going to see these veterans telling them how it's done and this is how you need to do it. And maybe that's a difficult environment to come into. Imagine being a young guy, like 21, 22, maybe you're an undrafted free agent or a late round pick, as many of Seattle's secondary players are. And you turn up and Richard Sherman's barking away and telling you what for and telling you how everything's got to be done and how you succeed in the league. And that can be quite an intimidating situation to be in, I imagine. And maybe you don't feel like you can have a strong voice the way that maybe Richard Sherman did when he came in as a rookie, when there wasn't that veteran there telling him to be quiet or something. I think maybe the fact that they're all young and new and with a point to prove together could be actually a good thing. It might actually help this group. And you'll find who are those strong voices going to be. Well, you're going to find out because they will emerge from this group. There's not going to be any veteran there telling them to pipe down, for example, or they're not going to just be looking at Cam and saying, what do we do now, Cam? There's an opportunity there for new leaders to develop and new voices to develop. And I'm excited about that. And yeah, do you know what? It's not going to be the same as it has been in the past. They're probably going to have to tweak the scheme a little bit. I don't mean that Pete Carroll's going to completely change the scheme because it's his system, but they might have to do things a little bit differently. For example, it's Bradley McDougald playing free safety instead of Earl Thomas. That's just the way it is. But let's see how these guys get on. Justin Coleman. Who'd heard of Justin Coleman a year ago? Who thought that Justin Coleman could come in and have the kind of impact that he had in the slot last season? He was a fantastic acquisition. Really excited to see how he's going to play this year on a contract year. What is Shaquille Griffin going to do in year 2? Show potential in year 1. Can he take a step forward now and really become maybe even the heart and soul of that secondary unit moving forward? There's the potential there for that. Byron Maxwell plays his best football in Seattle. And then you've got a bunch of young guys that we don't know really anything about, whether it is Tedrick or it is Delano Hill, whether it's Trey Flowers, the rookie. What's he going to show? Because the Seahawks spoke very positively about him. He looks like a Seahawks corner. DeAndre Elliott, who they liked and kept around for 2 years. Even guys you could say like Alex Carter, who are going to be there, and Morris Alexander, who they brought in, to play in the secondary, and Mike Tyson, who they drafted a year ago. There's a lot of guys in there that we just don't know anything about, positive or negative. Let's see him in preseason. Let's see him in training camp. Let's see if some new players can emerge here. But if there is one area that the Seahawks can draft, sign, and develop, it's this unit. Brandon Browner, CFL player, became practically the thing that started alongside Cam, the Legion of Boom. Who would have predicted that before it happened? Who would have looked at Seattle's secondary in 2011 and gone, yep, that is a great secondary. It ended up being a legendary secondary. It ended up being one of the best, if not the best, groups of secondary players ever to play the game. Sometimes you have to sort of let these guys play out, let the competition play out before you can make a judgment. And that's how I view these defensive backs. Might not be good this year. There's potential there for Seahawks to be bad at this position because they're young, they're not proven, they're inexperienced. It could be an issue. Could be an issue. No one's saying that Seahawks are guaranteed to have a great secondary just because Carroll's the coach. But if there's one area that he can get these guys playing, it's definitely the secondary. So I'm optimistic there. And they're going to be helped by people like Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright. Hopefully some of the defensive linemen are going to help out as well. So I think that while the Seahawks are definitely not going to be the 2013 Seahawks in 2018, there's still at least a chance to put a competitive product on defense on the field.
My last question regarding the training camp stories as we, head into Thursday's day one for Seahawks training camp. People can go watch it. Would surround, the guy that was the story of the draft. Maybe not just for the Seahawks, but for every team in the NFL. In some cases, the reuniting of Shaquem Griffin with Shaquille Griffin on one defense. A lot of hype around Shaquem Griffin. Where was he going to go? He went into the 5th round. Should he have gone higher? Is he more than a special teams player? Will he be held back by his missing arm? Any of those, types of stories. It's a feel-good story. It's a story worth watching, and training camp, I'm sure, will be no different. One of the, highest selling jerseys out there. People want the Griffin Bros to succeed. Expectations for Shaquem Griffin, do you think they're a little too high and we should, hold back and let him just be a guy that's a 5th round pick and a rookie trying to fit in with the other guys, or worth our attention and worth the hype and worth, following what the Griffin brothers are going to do? Any hope of maybe even seeing these guys on the field together in the regular season on defense?
Yeah, I think any hope, Kenny, of them quietly going about their business is gone because they're one of the best stories in the NFL. So, they're going to get an awful lot of attention every time that Shaquem's on the field. The cameras are going to be on him. There's going to be analysis of how he played after every game on the NFL Network. There's going to be numerous articles written about him. The spotlight is going to be on him in terms of the Seahawks. It's not going to be another rookie or another player probably in Seattle's roster that's going to get as much attention as he will over the next few weeks. So that's just how he handles that is going to be important, and how we as fans handle that's probably going to be important as well. So we don't go over the top if he has a sack in his first preseason game or has a great session at training camp in front of the fans there at the VMAC. Don't overreact to that, and don't overreact if he struggles to have an impact in his first preseason game or doesn't have much of an impact at all in preseason, because ultimately he is a 5th round rookie. You can't put too much pressure on a 5th round rookie. Usually a 5th round rookie might not make the team. I mean, there's no lock that Jamarco Jones is going to make the team. So Shaquem Griffin or the punter, Michael Dixon. So there's no real reason why Shaquem Griffin should be treated any differently. If 5th round rookies get cut by multiple teams every single year. So he's not a lock to make this roster. So let's not put too much pressure on him as a fan base. The media are going to do what the media are going to do. As a fan base, just let him sort of feel his way into the NFL. He's got so much to offer as a pass rusher, as a special teamer, as someone who can contribute in certain situations. There's things he's got to work on. Zone coverage is definitely one of the things he's going to have to work on as he becomes a pro. If he's going to be more than just a specialist, he has to find ways to sort of set the edge against the run and stuff like that as well, because he could be a bit of an issue there. But he's got a lot of potential, a lot of talent. Let's just see how he gets on. But he's another reason why these next few weeks, Kenny, it's finally here. Training camp starts this week. We're going to get reports from people who are there. We're going to get the media talking about who looks exciting. We're going to hear from Pete Carroll regularly. We're going to have games soon. I think this is the first weekend when there's a preseason game, isn't it? The Hall of Fame game. So, this is all coming around pretty quickly now. We're at the time, there's that long, boring period between the draft and the start of training camp, which is over now. It's going to be an exciting time. Griffin is part of it, but there are so many reasons for Seahawks fans to be intrigued and interested in ways they haven't been in previous years. This isn't just about who's going to be the fifth defensive back and who's going to be the fourth choice running back this year like it has been, or who's going to get the last receiver spot like it has in previous seasons when this has been practically an all-star roster. There are positions all over the field up for grabs. There's proper competition at training camp this year. There's an opportunity for new stars to emerge. So this is the most exciting training camp session for the Seahawks probably since 2012 when Russell Wilson was drafted and there was all that excitement building towards this monster of a franchise being built. So it's probably as interesting as it has been since then. It's time to get on with it now and see who's going to emerge.
Absolutely. And we'll take it out on that note. This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft. You can follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staton, Staton. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com to check out his articles there. You can follow us at Field Gulls, FieldGulls.com. Subscribe on iTunes through Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that at patreon.com/fieldgulls. And that's it. When 1 week from now on our next episode of the podcast, we will be talking about training camp. We will be talking about football. We will be talking about things that have happened. Hopefully we won't be talking about injuries too much. We will be talking about how things are looking, and it doesn't take long for certain people to stand out. It doesn't take very long at all to know who's doing well and who isn't. The coaches will be talking about it. We'll have press conferences and media and all that kind of stuff. So that begins tomorrow on July 26th. This was due to July 25th, but tomorrow it all gets started. And yeah, we're not far away from that first preseason game all of a sudden. This has been it for 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Come back next week for a brand new draft.